Oh, what day is it? Oh, it must be time for Prototype episode number 33. That's two threes, not three threes. We've got a couple of years to go, I think, at the current rate. But I am back. I am here to talk about Cosmonarchy Brood War and Cosmonarchy Brood War accessories, as the old Mesk saying goes, which is in and of itself, of course, from the hit TV show American Dad. Wink. No, obviously, we're here talking about the most ambitious StarCraft project that has ever graced your screens. And you have some screenshots from a Gauntlet qualifier that we were running for Ascension number 7, which is our 7th tournament, as you might guess. And of course, it is so that we can have some really high octane action, highly competitive stuff. The most competitive tournament ever. You know how it goes. Every single one is better than the last. That's just the rate of progress. At least that's what my health teacher told me when I was in middle school. And throwing down the gauntlet is where we find ourselves. So the gauntlet has concluded as of the time of you listening to this. You will, of course, be checking this out after we have decided our 12 players. We did just receive some very solemn news that Mystery Meat will not be available for Ascension number 7. He surprisingly had something come up where it was not going to be available by his computer for the next 2 weeks, which is crucial for the tournament since he's got to do group stage and then he's got to do playoffs and so on. So he'll have to bow out, which means now this really is everybody's tournament, anybody's tournament to take. He was the clear above and away, far and away favorite. And now I feel like maybe it could be Sublime, maybe it could be the Shambler, but, you know, we could also see a newcomer show up, right? Somebody who came out through the Gauntlet. Veek qualified through the Gauntlet. Maybe it's his time since he's got 7 in his name. It's Veek 7, Ascension 7. I don't know. There's something there going on there. Obviously, we had some new other promising Protoss players, Sarcasm being one of them. So anyway, there's a whole host of people that I'm very eager to see in action. However, I will suspect that we'll end up grabbing somebody out of the Gauntlet and having them take Mystery Meat's place. You can't really replace the Mystery Meat, but at the very least, you can say that you can move somebody up from the Gauntlet, and we'll talk a little bit about the Gauntlet and how it went, and my thoughts on it, and how we might change it in the future. But this is sort of the situation we find ourselves in. So even though in some ways it's really unfortunate that Mystery Meat won't be able to make it to this tournament, I also think it's an exciting opportunity for everybody who is still there. They might have been thinking to themselves, I'm really eager to test myself against Mystery Meat and see what I can do. But they might also be thinking to themselves, holy shit, without Mystery Meat here, I am now the next big dog. You know, that improves my chances of doing XYZ thing. And I would say that that is absolutely the case. So I would love to see them in action and take this as an opportunity to put on a good show so that he can maybe watch on, and wherever he has to go, he can at the very least see some exciting action in Cosmonarchy Brood War, maybe some strategies to mull over, and then he'll study up, power up, and get ready for our tournament sequences that are going to go down next year. And I'm very excited about those as well. We'll talk a little bit about that towards the end before we go into coffee questions, because there will, of course, be a break in tournaments after this one. But yeah, let's start on the Gauntlet. That's the main piece of the main topic of contention here and now. So the Gauntlet for Ascension number 7 was definitely the first time I've ever done anything quite like this. In the past, we would just have open signups, and we would go up to 12 players, and that's how Ascension 5 and Ascension 6 were. Going way back, Ascension 1 was actually only 2 groups. Ascension 2 and 3 and so on, all the way up to 4 were 3 groups. And then for Ascension number 5, we actually had enough people to barely scrap together 12. For Ascension 6, we had a more comfortable amount because we actually had ringers. But then, like, as Ascension number 6 group stage concluded, we basically knew that we would need to start thinking about a Gauntlet, since as a result of the project getting a little bit more higher profile, more people checking it out, the videos getting more discoverability, yada, yada, yada. Essentially, my shilling continued. And as it rose even ever further, it 100% had an impact on the number of people interested in competing. And I think that's just sort of a case of if you build it, they will come. Well, they fucking came. And now we got to figure out where to put everybody. So the open signups for the Ascension number 7 Gauntlet, the qualifier, etc., definitely made me think a bit about formats and how I wanted to do things. I speculated that the fact that it was double elimination and that it was best of 3 would kind of work together pretty well, in that best of 3 is a little bit more volatile than best of 5. By that, I mean a lower skilled player can more reliably maybe do some sort of cheese or surprise strat for 2 games out of 3 than 3 games out of 5. And that's usually the way that these things go. And with so many new players who didn't really know what the meta was and didn't really have a firm grasp of what to expect, that would actually increase the volatility. And we saw that most notably when Moonhunter eliminated Benza in a 2-to-1 set in the lower bracket. And that was very surprising to me because I think by all intents and purposes, Benza is a better player. But Moonhunter demonstrated some cheese, some sass. And Benza also kind of opted into that in the 2 games that he ended up losing in that 3-game set, where, him being very aggro, him being very trying to just close the game out relatively fast after finding success in a more macro-oriented opener. And so it was the comeback of Moonhunter just doing some silly shenanigans and them even being somewhat scouted, but just the reaction being a little bit wrong from Benza. And, it's a very cutthroat format in that you only have one opportunity to sort of underperform. You go cast down to the lower bracket. It's not as cutthroat as it could be. We could have done single elimination. I think that would have been really I would have said that would have been bad. I wouldn't have felt super good about that because it does come down to like, okay, if you're going to do a best of 3 and, some of these matches can end in 5 to 10 minutes, depending on the rushes or depending on the cheese or depending on what's going to happen. That definitely means that, the series could be over in a best of 3 in 20 minutes, 30 minutes. Like if it's a 2-0 and both games are 5 to 10 minutes, that could be very fast, right? So you wouldn't really want it to be like that. For the case of like, okay, you only have one chance. I did think about making elimination series always best of 5s in the same way that qualification series are best of 5s, but I decided against that for this one, and I'm glad that I did in retrospect. Maybe for the future, we can think about doing that, but in this case, we had essentially 1 week to bang out the qualifier, and we are finishing up the qualifier with one final best of 5 to qualify the last player onto, like, by the time you're listening to this, it's already done, but, Hapsaya versus Moonhunter, as of the time of recording, has actually not been played yet. And even though I would call that in favor of Hapsaya pretty much every day of the week, no shade towards Moonhunter, but it's just, you're talking about a player who's just much more experienced at RTS games, and it's not a mirror matchup, so he won't tilt as hard, I think. So Hapsaya should be very comfortable at taking that. Maybe Moonhunter can cheese like one game out of the set, but it wasn't so successful when he tried it earlier. They've actually played against each other in the past, and Hapsaya has won that relatively comfortably 2-0. And so looking at the bracket, looking at how things went down, there were some surprises for sure. I think Sipiak grinding with iSarcasm and maybe some other people on occasion to practice up meant that he took Veek to 5 games and almost won it. I thought that was really impressive. And in fact, because Mystery Meat was unable to make it, I actually extended the invitation to Sipiak and he has accepted. So we will see him after all in group stage. But that's another benefit of the Gauntlet, is that if something does come up unforeseen, it's a horrible thing for the tournament in some ways, or it's like, not at all ideal. But we can still continue on. There is still a show. We just look at the players who didn't qualify, preferably taking a player who made it to the sort of last stage, right? And so it's like, okay, well, if, Moonhunter fails to qualify because he drops to Hapsaya, but he has availability to replace somebody else who can't show up for whatever reason, then he would be the obvious candidate to replace him there, because he got to the point where he cheesed Benza in the upset, and he like clearly has some idea of like how to do some antics, and it's a good thing to have a player like that in the roster, I think. So he would be another candidate actually for being able to contend with some of these players. But like Sipiak was definitely the revelation, I would think, and it's cool to see that he'll actually be able to continue that storyline, practicing against most likely going to be slotting into Group A, but I'm not 100% sure. He could end up going to be, depending on some other things. And, by the time you're listening to this, that's all been figured out. So it's really exciting to me to have that level of, I guess, activity. And when I am looking through the future sort of like shadowboxing, how the formats are going to evolve, the fact that we have so many people who signed up this time around, including some people like Box Trade, for example, who hadn't barely played. I think he signed up on his like second or third day of even knowing that the project existed and played his first game the next day, right? So we're talking about somebody who's with very minimal project knowledge and awareness, and just like more baseline performance and skill, perhaps. And so he ends up conceding to iSarcasm. Well, that's not really a surprise, since iSarcasm only dropped 1 game throughout the whole Gauntlet, and it was to Hapsaya. Then Box Trade ends up defeating Dead Infested, and then taking Benza to a 3-game set in a series. Again, I would say Benza is like definitely the better player there, but somehow Box Trade manages to make it close. By the way, that whole set was no GGs, which I loved. I think maybe Dead Infested set was also no GG. I can't remember. But I love when people just don't GG. Like, I think half of the Terran players that actively play 1v1s in CMBW just decide not to GG every single time. And Hapsaya also doesn't GG, and then Shambler types something other than GG when he leaves. So it's kind of like a no GG. It's like a weird one. So I don't know. I like that stuff. It's beautiful. It is beautiful. So I'm looking forward to seeing some of these players return. Like I think, Newt showing up and being able to make it out, a surprising sort of reverse sweep in the situation where he was down 0-2 against Veek. That was a game to remember. But I did see Newt as fourth, so I had faith in him, even though he was saying he thinks he's just going to lose every game. But no, he actually made it through and he didn't drop a set. So that's pretty good. Going into the group stage, especially with Mystery Meat no longer in his group, I feel like he could conceivably exit in first place, which is really cool. So it's something that I will be very interested in seeing. And then as far as, the other players, I seeded him third. I thought for sure this guy should be able to make it through. Like my top seeds, for those who don't know, were Veek and Hapsaya. I think Hapsaya was first, Veek was second, and then we had iSarcasm as third and Newt as fourth. And so far, that prediction seems to be going well. Like if Hapsaya qualifies as we expect against Moonhunter, then okay, we're in. All my top four did qualify, and then Sipiak coming in is the real revelation because seeded fifth was Benza, and Sipiak was seeded 11th. And so it's like, holy shit, like this guy really turned his game up because I'm going off of the data that I have when I cast his replays versus It Depends, and when I see his game versus Benza where he struggles to defeat like the static defense and like finish the job and stuff. And I'm thinking, okay, well, I guess that came after he was already starting to play the Gauntlet by the time I saw that game. But either way, it's like an interesting set of situations when somebody really surprises you and like improves at a rapid rate. And I feel like you shouldn't overlook Sipiak just because he came in because Mystery Meat had to, abandon the tournament for the time being for his personal reasons. It's like, yeah, that's unfortunate for Myst. Hopefully everything goes out. Obviously that goes without saying. Hopefully everything works out for him just fine. And obviously like family comes first or whatever's going on in his personal life comes first. Got to make sure you take care of you, and we'll keep a spot warm for him when he comes back. But with him out of the picture, like I said earlier, a lot of people should be thinking, well, it's my time to shine now. And you can't just be like, oh, Sipiak got in here kind of like, he was just he was eliminated from the Gauntlet, but he gets the invite in out of chance and circumstance. Like, okay, whatever, next. No, you can't do that with this guy. Like, he almost defeated Veek, and I don't think Veek is a slouch, so Veek himself does qualify. You know what I mean? Like, these are things where it's like, if you consider the trajectory will continue to go up, even if it goes up at a lower degree, like even if it doesn't get that much better, I still think that you'll see Sipiak at least take some people close. Even if he doesn't even score any wins in his group, which I think he absolutely will, I wouldn't be surprised to see him exit in second place, which means he would qualify to playoffs. So that's pretty exciting. But yeah, the fact that the Gauntlet is what it is, it's a double elimination, best of 3 until you qualify, and then your qualification series is a best of 5. So at that point, you're starting to play the longer sets. And it's practice for the playoffs, because the playoffs of Ascension, after you get past the group stage, if you get past the group stage, which is a big if now because we have a much more competitive group stage than before, is the best of 5 bracket until the grand final, which is a best of 7. And I just like the idea. I think this time around, we will not have a 4-0. Like, we will not have a blowout in the grand final. We will see a back and forth series. Now, I don't know if we'll see a whole 7 game series, but we'll absolutely see a pretty solid series. So I'm excited about that. Obviously, we got to give us like 3 weeks or so to roll out the tournament, right? We got group stage, then we'll have quarterfinals played probably on Sunday, and then we'll see about casting the other such replays and stuff that get played throughout the week, if any do. And, round 2 and stuff like that is going to be a big deal. So, we'll just see if we can repeat the same pace of the last tournament, because then we'll be able to be done, and then we'll actually be done a week before Christmas or thereabouts. So that's going to be really useful for us, because then we have holiday time off and we have time to just do other things, and then we'll take our break. And I told everybody that I would talk about that at the sort of towards the tail end of this podcast. But I'm excited to see sort of like what fate has in store, I guess, for this tournament. And I think the Gauntlet was a nice way to show. It was to give some airtime to the players who didn't necessarily have too much of a chance of qualifying. I always want to shout out the homies. Like, I think it wasn't impossible that some of these people qualified, but it was not looking likely based on the field. I'd say people like Luciferius and Inoslix, who have contributed to the project in one way or another for a while now. People like It Depends, Dead Infested, who I thought, there was a chance that they could go through, but they would really need to buckle up and make it happen. And people like Scholar, who I was actually surprised to see fall to Sipiak. That was like the first thing that I was like, well, maybe Scholar's just not very good at Zerg, or maybe Sipiak is actually really solid. And then he goes up against Veek and almost takes him. That was crazy. So that was like the first little inkling that you had. And yeah, so thinking about all that and just considering it, it's like, okay, like this was a really cool set, a really cool experiment in some ways to run. And I think the Gauntlet, in the future, I would like it so that we don't have to do bracket swaps. I would like it if we can do the games a little bit more of an organized fashion and play those matches a little bit better off in that sense so that they don't take as long. But also, I think we should give ourselves maybe 2 weeks from the start of the Gauntlet before the group stage, because I think that will allow us to, if we need to add more games in because we have more signups or whatever, that's one thing. If we need to make it triple elimination, because I am making it top 6 in order to qualify, you have to win a playoff series in order to receive an invite back for the next tournament. And part of that is because there's going to be a longer gap. And another part of that is because I think it's just better if it's more competitive. And so you will actually see the bottom 6 of the tournament instead of the bottom 4 be cast down to the Gauntlet next time around. So that's a big deal. That's a big change to the format, actually. And I'll make sure everybody is informed of that as they get through. Like, it's not just qualifying to playoffs. It's now you have to make it to top 6, which means you have to win a playoff set. And, it's like easy to remember. It's not that difficult in theory, but, you have to really prove that you're a upper echelon player in that sense. And I don't know, like eventually we're going to get to a point where essentially like the people who regularly make top 6s at these tournaments are probably going to be like, they're the class 1s, or they're, ideally we have a lot of class 1s and they are like the best of the class 1s, division 1 or whatever, they are the tournament contenders in that sense. And I think it's really exciting to see stuff like that. So I think we absolutely should be on the hunt for that. Now, aside from everything that I just said there, I do think that we will probably see triple elimination in the future, and that definitely means we should have more time. But the reason I was thinking of triple elimination is because even though it's kind of a meme that it's like, oh, it's so many games, the thing to consider is if you need to sort for the top 6 of the Gauntlet so that you can qualify 6 players, that's the easiest way to do it. I guess you could do double elimination, and then the losers of the like round 4, I guess like the losers of the lower qualification would face off again. Like you'd basically have like a triple elimination or like a consolidation round where you like redo another stage of the tournament or something. Like you have a last chance qualification basically, and it would be for like the last 2 spots. I don't know though. Like it feels like it's actually more straightforward to do triple elim, and I also feel like maybe it makes it more of a spectacle. Like if we only have one of these every 2 months instead of once every month, going into the next year, then it could actually be more of a spectacle that the Gauntlet takes longer. And then if we have that 2-week period where 2 weeks from the very first Gauntlet stage game being played, or like 2 weeks out ahead of the group stage being scheduled, that's when we do our thing. I think that would be really cool. And, then we can still accommodate as many people as want to step in because we have that extra time. And then I also have extra time for the hype video and any materials that I need to generate and all this other stuff. So yeah, there's definitely a lot to keep in mind. And then if I have like a whole month off before I even have to start thinking about the next tournament, then that helps me plan with like, making content and building out other things like improvements to the game. And obviously we're going to be working on the Askosi, the new race, going into the next year. So that's going to be a big time sink as well. So I definitely want to make time for that. And I think 2024, it's time to start thinking about that to some degree because we're in December officially now, and I think it's going to be the year of the RTS insofar as it's the year of Cosmonarchy Brood War, bro. That's what it's going to be. So I hope you guys are as excited about that as I am, but that's definitely something to consider. So there's going to be some changes to the Gauntlet format insofar as it will be triple elim going forward, I think. That's sort of like my current stance on it. I am not unmovable on that position, but I think it should be fine considering we're going to carve out more time to do it. I think this current rendition was a success, but unfortunately we did have that bracket swap where we had to swap Veek and Hapsaya because of their availabilities, because of Veek's availability versus iSarcasm's availability, most importantly. I think that in the future, maybe like as shitty as it would feel, I think in the future we might have to just DQ somebody who can't make it. And I don't know where you would put the DQ is like the main problem. I guess it would be like the person with less availability overall or something. I don't know how you would decide who DQs who is the problem really, but we wouldn't have really had to grind out and like rush the games in the middle of the week if we had that 2-week grace period, because then we could have done some of these like harder to schedule matches on the weekend, like then the weekend after the week that we started, right? So like the following weekend basically, and I think that would have been fine. Like maybe then we don't need to DQ anybody and we don't need to bracket sub anybody. And so it's just cleaner. But obviously triple M is also more games. So maybe we would need even more time. I don't know. I'm not 100% sure, but I feel like that's a safe bet. So there you go. That's my feeling. Those are my feelings on the Gauntlet. I hope you guys enjoyed the games. I will be ripping out all of the different streams and rendering one solid video that just has all of the Gauntlet matches and then timestamping them. Because we did end up casting every single one. So that's kind of surprising. I mean, I casted most of them, but Mesk did join me for a number of them, particularly later on. So I am a fan of that. And then that's it. So there you go. The Gauntlet is not the only thing that we're here to talk about, though. Of course, we have other topics, one of them being balance adjustments and map pool changes going into the groups. And this is actually one of the things I'm not as comfy with, but I'll explain why I think it won't be a problem after I explain exactly what it is. So one of the things that happened as the tournament or the Gauntlet began is people started to realize how powerful certain things were. And one of those things was actually the cataphract. And I decided that I was going to like use the Gauntlet to test like the current meta as people had figured things out, because it has the madrigal changes. It has the, like the anchor build cost changes, the mineral cost reduction, the bio movement speed changes, the Protoss revisions and adjustments. There's all sorts of different things that are different from the last tournament. So I used the Gauntlet as a sort of testing ground for that. And I don't think that's a bad thing in principle. But because we are going straight from, Gauntlet patch to group stage patch, I feel like that's where it becomes uncomfortable for me, because I'm graduating people to the group stage without any sort of downtime for them to practice any adjustments to the update. I'm not making massive sweeping adjustments in most cases, but like the cataphract did receive, I would say a mid-tier adjustment where it has one less range, it has no armor pen, it has faster attack speed. And that's basically how you come up with the unit, is like, okay, we've improved or adjusted it, like the unit and facilitated its combat role being a little bit more solid, a little bit more obvious, like steady, instead of it basically being a generalist that does everything pretty well. So it doesn't impinge upon things like the phalanx as much anymore. But I do think, anyway, like regardless of the specifics of the cataphract change, I feel like, broadly speaking, the game will be played the same. It's just I've smoothed out some things and improved some things. Like unit handling for the architect is better. Unit handling for a lot of Protoss stuff is actually better. Things like the Dracodin, the Atreus, the Uptecton. I fixed a lot of the unit sizes and made it so that they're a little bit more sensible. So that was one of the main things that was done. And I feel like these balance adjustments are not actually going to be as impactful as the map changes. So we are going to be replacing Exidu with Impetus, a new map by Veek7. Exidu, I think, did have a healthy amount of testing via the Gauntlet. Actually, like especially towards the end, it actually showed up a little bit more frequently. And players just don't want to play it in playoffs at all. Like most of the time it gets pick banned, or rather banned. You would see it show up in the group stage a number of times, because you don't ban maps in the group stage, but I don't think you would see it ever any other time, right? And with Impetus in the map pool by Veek, it's I think Bittybees described it as the successor to Repulsion. At least that's what Veek told me. And I don't necessarily see that it's that similar, but it is a 2-spawn map on the space platform tile set. We don't currently have that in the pool in terms of visuals, so that will be nice. I was debating to use Fata Morgana by Veek7 as well, but I will hold off on changing so many maps because, again, we are changing map pool. We're making adjustments to the maps and stuff right after the Gauntlet and going straight into group stage. I think having more changes, you should probably never drastically change the group stage patch versus the Gauntlet patch, because you are qualifying people to the group stage from the Gauntlet. So you don't really want like massive changes to the game to take place between them. But I think I would be happy to change the maps a bit more and have it be like, okay, if there's this 2-week break or a week-long break for the Gauntlet qualifiers, like they can practice up they can make time to practice the new maps. If there's 2 new maps instead of 1, that's fine. But in this case, there is no time. So keeping it minimal, grabbing the least played map and replacing it with something that is actually fairly standard in all things considered, I think is going to be fine. Like, it's more standard than Exidu. So after people learn some details about it, I think it'll be acceptable. And happy to welcome Veek back, not just to the tournament as a player, but also as a map maker. So that's pretty funny. And of course, there's still Beaver representation with Infinite Velocity 2, which is radically different, actually, than Infinite Velocity 1. I can see why he ended up incrementing the name, because the whole sort of mid-section of it is very different. And we got to see a very epic game on it as the decider between Veek7 and Sipiak. And now both of them are in the tournament again. So isn't that epic? We get to see, maybe that'll be a rematch at some point. So I'm looking forward to that. The other thing, though, is that I did adjust many of the maps. I adjusted many maps, adding more minerals to the mains and adjusting the layout of the minerals to be a little bit more efficient. So we have there's a number of maps that had 8 minerals per main and also 8 minerals in the natural. And now there are some maps, I don't think Otherworld got this change. Maybe it got 9 instead of 8. I can't remember exactly because I made changes to a lot of maps and I made them fairly quickly. And basically, the idea is that now you'll have either 9 or 10 mineral fields in the main, and if you have 9, you'll have 9 in the natural. So you kind of have an increment of 2 no matter what. If you have 10, you'll have 8 in the natural, and in some cases, you'll also have 6 in the third, like on Sideshow or on Victory Square, because the reason being is that the third is safe, right? On those maps. So I think this will help. I also adjusted the natural where the resources are on Sideshow in the natural so that it favors air raids a little bit less. You can still drop there and you can sabotage the gas mining because the geyser faces the cliff. But I still think it will be a healthier situation for air. I didn't really see it that heavily abused, but I myself did heavily abuse it. And I thought to myself, you can still fit defenses back there, but some of the meatier defenses like engrams and stuff can't. So, it's a little awkward to find a spot for them. It'll be a little bit easier now. So I think that is a meaningful improvement on the map, even if it's just a minor one. So hopefully people find it a little bit easier and more compelling to hang out on these maps and play up to the 2 base. This is actually brought about because on Infinite Velocity 2, and this is also true of the old one, you actually aren't as pressured to expand because you have so many minerals. And I don't think it's healthy for every map to have that, but I think it would be fine if more maps had a little bit more potential of one base play for a little bit longer before you start to see those diminishing returns on the workers. So that's sort of my thought process. And, it does mean that it was kind of convenient that every base in the main, except for Infinite Velocity, had 8 mineral fields. And that's because when you hit 16 workers, you just start transferring to your natural. But now you just have to remember, okay, is it 9 mineral fields? Then it's 18 workers. Is it 10 mineral fields? Then it's 20 workers. And making them a bit more efficient should also help with early game pacing ever so slightly. It's not going to make an enormous difference, but it will make a compounding difference since it's going to make it so that every return is a little bit more efficient. So, it's not even going to be every return, but hopefully you get that there. And I guess that's pretty much all I have to say. I'm excited and very much interested in the looking through the whole setup for how this tournament is going to play out. I think the one map change as far as the impetus joining the pool and replacing Exidu is going to be good. Not because I think Exidu was even that bad of a map, but I think people's lack of willingness to play it basically meant that it may as well not exist other than to spend a ban on. And I don't really think that's a fault of the map. I know some people are going to have stronger opinions on it than I do. Obviously, as the author of a map called Highwater, where everybody thinks it's drop heaven and stuff and nobody wants to play it, except, some people do, but a lot of people don't want to play that one either. That is a funny situation, right? So it's okay, well, whatever. You guys don't always appreciate certain things about certain maps. Maybe it's only good for a spectacle or something. I'm open to that argument. But I think it's fine for the maps to have different characteristics to them. And I guess maybe that will be a more palatable argument to make if we have more standard maps. Maybe if Otherworld is one of the only, if you have Otherworld and Infinite Velocity 2 and one other map that's very starkly distinct in some interesting way, but not imbalanced, just different, then the other 5 maps in the pool were all different in a different way, but mostly standard. Then something like Sideshow or Nitro Valley or whatever. Although I know that Shambler thinks that Nitro Valley is really bad for Zerg. for the thirds and stuff. I think you could probably just take like 9 o'clock or 3 o'clock or something and then have a forward post, but it probably depends on the spawns. If it's easier to do if it's cross spawn, probably. Anyway, that's all neither here nor there, but I'm just saying, like, there's going to be some maps that are like, as the maps get like a little bit more standardized in some ways, I think you'll see a more acceptance for the more wacky maps, because if you really don't like them, you can ban them. But they are still there as like a flex pick. And actually, we might end up adding in a pick instead of a ban. So it might be pick ban as opposed to like, well, what I mean to say is you might, either of you ban a map, and then you pick a map. So you, like, say the top seed picks the first map and the lower seed picks the second map. And then you both ban a map again, and that leaves you with a decider or whatever, you know, like, or leaves you with 2 maps that could be decided, and like somebody picks it. That would be the case for a best of 3, right? So yeah, I don't know. That's kind of interesting. Maybe we can do that for next year. Like, I'll think about that. We'll keep the current system for banning and picking and stuff as we currently have it. And obviously that doesn't apply to groups anyway, because groups is just the challenger selects the next map. But I think it'll be good. I think it'll be fun. And I am looking forward to seeing people try out Impetus and try out the new, like, slightly more mineral wealthy maps and see what people think of those. So that will be that. And with the balance adjustments, the map pool change, and the map adjustments, like the adjustments to the resources and stuff, I do think that CMBW will have a very exciting tournament. Not just exciting in a hollow novelty way, but also in a deep strategic way, where I think we are seeing some fresh faces that have been practicing up and playing a lot, and I'm very excited to see them in action. So yeah, stay tuned for that. I figure we can talk a little bit about the progress that has been made on AI, factions, co-op content, and campaigns. We have been able to get a little bit further along the tutorials, of course. The progress on those is continuing. The co-op content did receive a healthy amount of attention since the last prototype, or around the development of the last prototype. Obviously, I had talked a little bit about the work that I was doing for revamping some of the Hydra missions, and at least 1 or 2 additional ones have actually made it up to the repository. And BiddyBee basically bankrolled, or you could say took out a bounty for and commissioned the creation of a new game mode called Faction Wars. I don't believe that the networking part currently works yet for selecting your faction, which is obviously a key indicator there, but it does work in single player. And the problem really is that there's not that much content for the factions yet, but I did end up adding a unit for the Hekatons called the Hotshot, which in and of itself probably needs a little bit of additional work, particularly the model kit bash of the Madcap that I made could use so it could use some TLC in that respect, you know, adjusting its silhouette a little bit more so it doesn't just look like the Madcap's son, basically. Now, the main work on this has definitely been downstream of like, okay, add AI support for factions. Yep, that's done. The faction wars itself, they need to pick a faction, and then we need to figure out how to network it, and then that's pretty solid. The co-op content, well, that's related to the Hydra missions. We got more of that lying around, and some of those do indeed feature factions. And then on the campaign side, you know, we not only need to finish up the tutorials, but we need to get started working once again on Day of Blood, which is the probably the first campaign that I'll end up fully releasing. I have had some thoughts kicking in my head for a Zerg campaign. I think what we'll end up doing is like a short Terran campaign, a short Protoss campaign, and then a short Zerg campaign, following the pattern of releasing the tutorials for the actual tutorial missions for each race. And then, of course, the idea being that they follow the order from left to right of the factions, or the races, rather, that you see on the main page when you go to Cosmonarchy Brood War's website. So following that order, you know, Terran, Protoss, Zerg. And then, of course, the ever-present idea that we can eventually go to the Askosi, which is going to be very awesome. And yeah, I think overall the progress has been good. I just wanted to sort of earmark a little section here in prototype number 33, talking about how we have achieved some pretty good stuff. We have been able to get some work done on that front, and that's amidst all of the other things that I've been grinding out for the tournament and for the Gauntlet and for the hype video and for all the things that I've been working on. But here we are, continuing to make progress, continuing to smash, and with any luck, I'll be able to get something out and enjoy the Christmas break for you guys as people start to come on home and rediscover Cosmonarchy Brood War, or discover it for the first time, whatever happens to be the case. We definitely want some exciting things. In fact, in a sort of related celebration. We had the Christmas celebrations kick in, obviously, overnight. I'm disabling those for the tournament, but that's just for readability's sake, because actually the minerals are quite different. It's quite difficult to read what's going on with those. But the I think it was kind of funny. It takes system time, and I was playing, and it hadn't yet become December, and then I was playing with It Depends, and we had some very hilarious games. But it started off, we were played at like 11:45 p.m. my time, and so he was like talking about how epic the reskins were, and I was like, oh, I don't have that yet. So that was kind of funny. But yeah, even that is like, he's new to the project. He's probably never seen that. Now he knows, holy shit, they've got like a Christmas celebration stuff going on, like a winter celebration, like December celebration stuff kicks in or whatever. That's really exciting. It's just novel. It's not something you would expect, but we do have that in a limited sense. Going into the next year, I think it would be great to have more stuff like that, right? April Fools, Halloween, stuff like that, right? I think it makes a lot of sense. So, moving on from all of that, and considering whether or not we are going to continue pumping out that kind of content. I guess I'll dive into that a little bit more when I talk about what we're going to do during the break. But the next section I wanted to cover is the Askosi tech tree. I wanted to go into a little bit of a dive onto that, because the Askosi tech tree, I mean, on the website, it's like super bare bones right now. We just have the Landlock, which is their town center, the Pilgrim, their worker, and the Proselyte. The Proselyte. Holy shit. I don't know why I mispronounced that one. That was a bad one. So the Proselyte is the most interesting thing, I think. I mean, the fact that their workers have interlocking mechanisms, which is like their passive, that they're like cornerstone, that basically means that they can collaborate on the task, I think is really cool. The Proselyte, though, is an exciting unit to have, because the early tier Askosi infantry, and just Askosi in general, their infantry branch is called Biotic, for reference. Biotic Askosi are basically going to be a pretty good set of like cooperative, like coordination with micro. And their very basic trooper, right, which is sort of like their equivalent of a Maverick in some ways, has a little bit more HP than the Maverick. It costs 75 minerals instead of 50. And it has comparable sight range. I'm not 100% sure about its DPS just yet, but it's going to have a 2x4 attack with 1 armor pen is my current idea. It's kind of evocative of like a Quasilisk, but obviously you get 2 Quasis for the same cost, right? And the real thing that the Proselyte has up its sleeve is its ability. So it can leap to a target ally within 5 weapon range, right? So that's the weapon range of, for example, the Maverick. So any ally within that, and neutral stuff does count for this. Obviously, you have to have vision of them. Any ally within 5 range can be leapt to, and they have 150 energy, and the leap costs 100 energy. It's called Rapid Rendezvous, by the way. So their passive is their active ability on their main unit, I think is going to be, that's going to be kind of interesting for people to sort of get used to. I think it's kind of interesting in concept, or in principle anyway, to have their basic unit have this level of micro potential, and it actually being downstream of an active ability. And this kind of brings me to a different topic of like, I feel like you don't really want the energy regeneration overlay on all of your units all the time, probably. But it would probably be better if in some way we had like an overlay that was mostly hidden on the unit, but like some part of the unit lit up when it had enough to jump, so that there was a read for when you knew like, okay, the Proselyte can jump, because that means that you as the player know that, and then you as your opponent also know that. But even though I said that's going to be the basic infantry unit, it's going to do okay en masse by itself. It's just, you can do some interesting micro tricks with them. And it's not just going to be ideal. Like, this is my idea of like, I find this more reasonable than something like the Reaper, because the StarCraft 2 Terran Reaper is basically just, let me just go up cliffs. And then they make all these maps with all these Reaper jump off spots. And that's the only way that the unit can be used. And it's only ever used in the early stages of the game. And there's never a point where you would want to make it later on for any reason. And now here comes the Proselyte, and my concept for this Askosi infantry unit is basically that if you get one of them into the base, right, they're going to have pretty good movement speed. If you get them up the ramp or whatever, then like other Proselytes can jump in and join. And this is an ability that's going to be shared among a number of other units, so that not every biotic unit will have this, but this is an ability that is going to be shared. And I just like that idea a lot. I think it has the potential to be really good. Now, I don't know if the proselyte will, like in its final form, still be the Maverick equivalent for the Askosi. I mean, it is a little bit more money, and I don't think it necessarily has like it doesn't have twice as good stats, right? So you are going to need to really utilize the micro. Their weapon range is only 4, so that's actually less than their ability range, for example. So they do have to get pretty up close and personal in order to make things happen. And that means that they have to enter into the weapon range of the Quasilisk, which is also 4, the Maverick, which is 5, obviously the Dracodon, which is 6, Ecclesiast is 5, stuff like that, right? So they need to enter into harm's way to do damage. So it's not like you can just outrun them forever, or outrun your opponent forever or whatever, and use that. So this is very much like a in the middle of battle, I'm going to relocate kind of thing. And they don't have clerics, so like you can almost think of them in some ways. This is like an ideal unit to have in the early game of a team game, because you can jump to allies and not just your own units. But I think in 1v1s there will also be exciting things you can do, and I think it's going to be cool to be able to jump to neutral things as well, because neutral always counts as an ally for any of these sort of mechanics. So that in and of itself, I think, is going to be really good for scouting. I don't want the Askosi. Obviously, like it goes without saying, I don't want them to be overpowered or underpowered compared to the other races. But the way that they're going to get a lot of information in the early stages of the game is probably going to be like the obvious worker scout. And then they can send, these kinds of things around. Their idea of tech progression, where basically they need a basic structure to unlock the next set, like the advanced tier 1 structure. So each tier will have a basic and an advanced component, basically. So there's going to be basic biotic production at tier 1. That's your barracks, essentially, your stockade, whatever. And then your advanced biotic production at tier 1 will be unlocked by that. But your basic biotic production will also unlock your advanced tier 1 mechanized production, right? Your mech stuff. And the vice versa. Like if you open with a tier 1 mech structure, you will unlock tier 2 biotic structure, as well as obviously just having access to tier 1 by default. And I'm sort of mixing it with tier 1 and tier 2. What I mean is like advanced, basic and advanced, right? So each tier is sort of like split, further split, or split in 2, basically. So you've got like the tier 1.5, I guess, as well as just straight up tier 1. You can kind of think about it like that. Now, there's not going to be any air until, at best, like maybe they would need one other structure. So maybe they would need to open up with a biotic structure or a mechanized structure before they get a Skyborn structure, which is their air branch. So maybe they would need a basic one, or maybe they would need a basic and an advanced one. And so the Skyborn stuff really would only start at tier 2. I haven't decided on that yet. But I think that will help rein this kind of ability in, so that it doesn't basically get super easy. Like the ally would need to be a ground target. I guess I should add that as a specification. The ally needs to be a ground target to be the recipient of Rapid Rendezvous. And as you leap to an ally, like that means that air units aren't going to be that useful, but you can't just like transport like one unit over and then jump to that unit immediately without actually investing in a transport to begin with. So like, it's not like you get the Ovaleth or the Trojan like super early, like in the other cases, right? So your air is going to be behind a bit of a tech wall and paywall in that sense. And I think that's fine. I think that's probably going to be healthy for them. By and large, it's actually kind of funny, because obviously the Terrans have biotic, or they have like their infantry, right? Their raider branch, and then their armor branch. And early on, armor is more mobile with like vultures and stuff than, even the Cyclops like makes pretty good speed with most of the bio that you have available at tier 1. But like obviously Masons move a little bit, Mavericks move a bit faster now. So like Cyclops keeps pace with them. Goliaths are okay with them as well. And it's really only once you start getting into like Blackjack Matador, or like specifically Matador, where you start running into like slow mech, and then the higher tier mech is much slower. And I think that when you look at the mech for Askosi, Askosi mechanized units are going to be, I would say, almost exclusively slower than Askosi biotic units. So where it's like further going down that sort of idea of like bio should be the more mobile one, and mech should be the less mobile one. And that's broadly going to be true for Askosi as well. They will have a homie-mobile type unit. I've talked about that before as well, where one of their tier 1 mech units will basically be this like sidecar type thing in my head, where you garrison an infantry unit in it, and it can shoot while the like it's sort of like a mobile anchor in that way, but you can only fit one infantry unit in there. I get like you can only fit units with one transport cost in there, is what I mean to say. And I guess like maybe like they don't have repair like Terrans do. It's not like the Pilgrim has repair. So I'm not 100% sure if you would be able to do anything with the Pilgrim. Like I don't, maybe it would attack in melee or something if you were like carting a Pilgrim around. But there could still be a reason to do that, right? Like this homie-mobile type unit, the sidecar type unit, whatever I end up calling it, would be obviously much faster than the worker by default, right? And this is like the one exception so far that I've come up with for Askosi mech being slower than Askosi biotic. It's like, okay, well, this unit might be faster, or it might, at the very least, it should be like kind of the same speed as like, say, the proselyte or something. And for that reason, right, because like otherwise you're not, the only thing you're not getting any mobility bonus, you're just getting the garrison bonus, which is something, but it's not necessarily what you would really want. Not the only thing you might want for that, depending on the investment. And then, you know, if the vehicle dies, should the garrisoned unit die or should they just get unloaded? I'm not 100% sure about that. I know in Warcraft 3, if you have like units in a Zeppelin and they die over pathable terrain, the units do get unloaded, but they take some amount of damage. It might be like 50% of their max health or something like that. And they also are dazed. They are debuffed and like slowed with their movement and attack rates for some very lengthy amount of time. I don't think I would want to do anything like that. But maybe that could be explored as like a unique aspect, because for Terran, they have the passive for things like the Anchor, where they have the evacuation passive, where the units are just unharmed when the structure blows up. And obviously for their transports, everything always dies. But if it's like a structure that has that, then you get the units back. Or if it's like a sieged cuirass when we implement that behavior. And I think that's fine. The idea that it could be different for Askosi is fine to me as well, but it's also fine if it's just evacuation in that sense too. Like there's not going to be too many units where the Askosi have this. They are going to have a couple of garrisonable things, but none of them are going to be stationary. That's going to be the distinction, right? It's like the Tensender is planned, that's a tier 3 anchor for people who don't know, is planned to allow you to shoot while firing and stuff. Like shoot while lifted rather is what I meant to say. But I'm not even sure if that's going to happen or not. It might just end up being like a giga anchor in that way, where it like you can fit bigger things in it. But so if that were the case, then we would basically have like Terran garrisons are stationary and their structures or deployed siege units or whatever. Like the Cuirass is not a siege unit, but like the deployed unit. And then Askosi would have only mobile garrisons that have much less space in them, and then that would make more sense in that sense, I think. I've also, I guess as a general note, I've been thinking a bit more about like, should you be allowed to load mechanical units into anchors and stuff? And I think from a systems perspective, it makes perfect sense, and it's logical to me, and it's attractive to me as a designer. But I wonder if there couldn't be like a more visually appealing way to demonstrate that. Like, can we do something to the anchor visually to make it look like it could realistically house, say, a vulture or 2 Goliaths or whatever? Like, I'm not 100% sure about that. So you do get into awkward territory from a visual standpoint. And I guess like genuinely, like it sounds silly for people who only care about the competitive side of the game, but I care about realism. I care about, I guess you could say not realism, but like immersion. And it might be a little immersion breaking if you have something like that going on. So, and I totally agree with that kind of thing. There's some people in the YouTube comments were actually talking a bit about that. So there you go. But one of the things I'm definitely paying attention to here is, for the Askosi, how can I design something that's attractive to try out, and attractive, specifically like one of their playstyles is supposed to be a little bit more on the micro side. Like they, unlike Terran, who they're micro intensive, but the idea is that they can also like have very strong defensive options. It should be more like the Askosi can be a bit more competitive in head-to-head fights, but they need the micro to make the most of those situations and trade more cost efficiently. You will have higher build times on average, even if it's just by a little bit, for their structures. And this is going to increase a lot more at the later tiers. But like, you know, maybe their first structure, their like tier 1 biotic production, their stockade equivalent, is going to be fairly comparable to a stockade or exactly identical to a stockade in terms of build time. And that's fine. But their advanced one at tier 1 may be like the cost in time of like, say a tier 2, like a captaincy or something. And the reason for that is because they have the team building. So this is another thing that's like a little bit, you got to be careful to balance it, because if you're not careful, you could end up with team building being really, really good and not providing any sort of downside. Or you could be in a situation where it's not really that impactful, and so you just don't even really bother most of the time. Like it's actually too bad, it's like too punishing, right? So I haven't decided on the exact specifications, but the shared designs passive of the Pilgrim is currently set to increase construction rate by 15% for every worker that you add, which means that you need to dedicate a lot of workers in order to build it, say, twice as fast. But you are obviously losing efficiency, resource efficiency for that in terms of harvesting rate. And if you this could also, like, I want to be very careful that this doesn't result in like, I always just send like this would be an extreme example, but like 2 or 3 of my first workers go to build like a static defense structure somewhere. And it's like, well, I can't stop them because they build so fast. I would hate for that to be the case. So yeah, build times at the base level have to be created in such a way to incentivize Askosi players to use the team building, but the team building has to be balanced in such a way that it doesn't make things too like OP for them and also isn't too punishing for them if they choose to use it. So they should want to use it, and it should be okay if they don't, I guess, at least at the early stages of the game when workers are more individually precious. But then they should probably benefit from doing it. And maybe their advanced worker, which will fly like all the other advanced workers, that might be the case where it's a little bit more liberating to use this passive because, you know, you don't have to navigate with a ground unit across like a bunch of buildings that block pathing, for example, and stuff like that. So these are considerations that I have. I don't think that the Askosi workers are going to move around the construction site at all. I think what will happen instead is that they will simply like be at the spot, sort of like how your workers mine from whatever angle they approach the mineral field, and then they return to the town center and then go back there. Like, I kind of think it'll be like that, where the workers basically approach it as if they were going to mine a mineral field, like approach a resource node to mine, and they just start, playing their work animation basically. And then it speeds up the process. I think that's essentially how it'll be. So it'll still be external construction, is what I mean. You won't have the worker be inside like Warcraft 3 orcs or I guess it'll be like Warcraft 3 peasants, I guess, for humans. That's another example that you could draw upon. But it wouldn't be like that, and it wouldn't be like the orcs where that's internal. Another example of this is actually the Gosvaleth for Zerg, which is internal, or it's supposed to be. It's technically a new unit that gets created, but whatever. So yeah, hopefully that makes a lot of sense. And I guess with that, I can talk a little bit more about what we're exactly going to be focusing on once we hit this little break here after Ascension number 7. We go into a period of activity where it's not going to be worried about 1v1s. It's not going to be worried about like, is the game super balanced in this moment? This is going to give us a lot of time to think about the map pool, think about the content that is completely unrelated to competitive 1v1s, and probably host some very fun events. So yeah, let's talk about that. Earlier yesterday, the 30th of November, as we started to think about December and all of the things that we would be doing, one of the things that came to my mind was that it was a good idea to open up a thread in the CMBW events channel called Fun Event Ideas. And wow, there was a lot for me to read when I woke up. There was a lot of good ideas in there. One of the things that kept coming up was like if we had a really high tier player take on a bunch of lower tier players. And basically it would be like a 1 versus 4, and the high tier player might have like a resource multiplier or something. Another suggestion, of course, was something like an adapted version of Phantom so that it would like better fit the CMBW environment. And, all sorts of other things. Basically, like you could add more game modes. And Biddy Bee has taken out another bounty because he's basically Bounty Bee at this point. And it's for a tech progression where instead of harvesting Vespene gas, you have a game mode where you get 1 Vespene, probably per unit trained, and you get 3 Vespene per unit killed. I think that's what the initial idea is. Or maybe it could be 1 and 2, so that way you're not overly punished for losing units. It's just more valuable to kill a unit than it is to preserve one. I know that the first thing that people started talking about is, well, it's going to be really hard to farm Protoss because they have less units, and it's going to be really hard to get anywhere as Zerg because they make more units. And so maybe it would actually be it would be even. So you get 1 point for making a unit, 1 point for killing a unit. And so, yeah, you can farm like a Zerg player, but you need to make your own units, and like it's equivalent. Killing one Zeth is the same as building one Zealot, right, or whatever. So Protoss would need to get a lot of kills because they make less units, and Zerg might need to get less kills because they make more units, and Terran would be somewhere in the middle, odds are. And I think that could actually work, honestly. Like as like a basic idea, I think it would be really cool to try that. Now, this does mean that, like, obviously workers would count. So I guess you would start with 6 Vespene for your starting workers. And then every time you get a kill, you get a gas. Every time you train a unit, you get a gas. And obviously this would be 2 per Zeth or Nath or Quasi, as an example. Like anything that's dual birth, you get 2 of. And so, yeah, I don't know. That there's something about that that's pretty interesting. I still don't think it'll be very... Like, I don't know. I don't know what to think about it. It would just be such a wacky game mode because if you think about the stuff that you normally spend Vespene on, like, what would you do? Your first 50 Vespene as a Terran player, like, that's a bunch of Masons and Mavericks or whatever. And it's like, do you spend it on a Fulcrum? And then you get access to Scrapyard and Blackjack, as well as Vulture, obviously. So that could be an option. But I definitely think that certain things would just be totally unused. Like, who the fuck is going to spend 100 on a Starport? Because then they still need to spend 25 on a Wraith, or 50 on a Trojan, or 75 on an Antseal. It would just be ridiculous. But the game might be in an interesting enough state, like not intentionally, obviously. But, you know, you've got like Lodestone for static detection. That's mineral only. You've got, for Zerg, obviously they need the Ovaleth, but I guess it's just one thing, right? It's 50 Vespene still. It's a lot. But like if they needed to detect for some reason. But like odds are you're not going to be facing Wraiths or Lachezelisks or Kabbalists because it's so much Vespene, right? I think Protoss would have the hardest time. My cursory idea is that Protoss would have the hardest time because they could pretty much, like, it would always be lattice first, so you can get vassals or sims, because that's pretty legit. You can also get golems. They're mineral only. So they might have the most flexible early game army. But like in order to actually make anything, yeah, I guess maybe Protoss would be okay. Maybe they would just spam vassals every game. By the way, I guess every time you make a sim clone, that would have to count as you getting a gas. So sims could be really legit, actually, if microed well. You know, there's definitely going to be certain things. And then, God forbid, you ever get to the point where you can make a Convolsc, a Zerg. Like, holy shit, dude. That means that you could make brood spawn. And that is actually going to count, right? So that would be really good too. And yeah, I guess if you revive a unit, that should count because it's like making a new one out of a corpse, basically. You can kind of think about it that. So apostles can farm them. You would start killing your own units just to revive them. So you can do that. That's pretty good. Yeah, I feel like there's definitely something going on there anyway. So there's some interesting things that could happen. So like that's a game mode that we'll try to slap together during the break. Maybe we can get that done sooner. And if that game mode exists and we try to do an event on each game mode, like an Omnipresence game mode, we already have that. So let's do an event for it, right? This sort of like David versus Goliath situation where you've got a bunch of Davids instead of just one. Okay, that's pretty cool. Like the Juggernaut idea or whatever. So that could be a one-day event where we just do it like one Saturday or whatever. And yeah, I don't know. Like stuff like that could definitely be a thing. I'm also compiling a list of tasks that I would like to focus on and finish up, essentially check off on the Trello page, right? I actually haven't published anything here. I've just been like writing down ideas and thinking of stuff. But, you know, one of them is ideally like, for example, before the next tournament, by the way, like before Ascension 8, or it's not going to be called Ascension, but before our 8th tournament. The idea that I have is we would finish certain features or make, you know, like complete certain things that have long been outstanding that we just have never, because we've been constantly like making tournaments and stuff, we've never really spent time on. One of them would be completing some work on like some internal hooks that make it so that when you select a unit, like a structure that is training a unit or an egg or whatever that's morphing, you actually see how many seconds are left. Like it would tell you like 10 seconds, 7 seconds, whatever, how many seconds were left as the progress bar is going. So you would actually see like a number and then an S for seconds or something like that. Maybe it would just be like time left and then a number and you would figure out its seconds, something like that. So we wanted that for like a year or more. It's ever since the time cost was patched in to be on the tooltip. It would because I still can't believe that's not a default feature. Holy shit! But yeah, we added that into CMBW, and ever since then, that's been in there for what feels like at least a year. We've also wanted to patch it into the progress bar so that you can see how much time remaining. Like that's one thing that we want to add. Ideally, we would replace the repulsion mechanic of like air units repulsing. I don't think this would have any effect on them while they're moving, but it would mean so that we can like repulse them faster when they stop moving which means that if they try to attack, right, they would start to decollide or whatever. And that might help them with certain, like that might basically be like a pseudo fix to air units infinity stacking. Probably not, but at the very least, if like in some cases it would be, and it would also improve other things like the Anthelian behavior, where it just creates these like weird vortex bugs, unfortunately. And some other things would be like more easy to do that way. And generally it would like repulse faster and in a more sensible way than just like what happens right now, which is where they just sort of slowly, very, very slowly split up, and it's not very insane. So it might even be good for like if you have an air army and you're trying to split it, you hit stop while they're stacked up, and then they like they automatically kind of split a little bit faster, and then you can maybe like issue the command. That might even be like a nice like quality of life fix for controlling air units, because the infinity stacking is a problem when you're facing splash for the air player, and when you're not facing splash, then it's a problem for the player you're attacking with them. So it's stupid. At different contexts, it's stupid for different people and for different reasons. It's just stupid all around, though. Like, it's guaranteed somebody is having a stupid thing happen to them. It's a question of if it's the air player or the player who's fighting the air units. So it's just a dumb thing. It shouldn't be a thing. I don't think we can fix it in Brood War entirely like the way that we would want to, but maybe the repulsion thing is like a step in the right direction, right? So that's something that we would like to adjust. Obviously, if there's any leftover instability, we've got way better detection and information regarding like tracking down desyncs and stuff now. So if there's anything left over after this tournament, then we would like to resolve that. And aside from that, yeah, like I guess it's pretty much just trying to extend those limits, get the iScript extender finished, and start working on Askosi as a result. Complete some more content, like campaigns, tutorials, whatever, and yeah, just try to really pump up what is like available for people in CMBW, and then occasionally still have these sort of like fun events. Like one of the ideas that I had for an event that would be just a one-off, like a single day thing. It doesn't all have to be for fun. We can have like a serious competition thing with like a mini prize pool or whatever, and it would basically be like, hey, for one day only, you've got like an Ascension invitational, basically, and it's like the King of the Hill group style, and there's no playoffs bracket afterwards, and it's straight up just who wins in this group, and we invite the three best players of each, like one best player for each race, right, and see what happens. The other thing we could do if we wanted to is we could make it so that it's I guess it would ideally it would still be a single day thing, but I don't know about people's availabilities. But one of the things we could try to do is make it so that it's like the old school Artosis Ascensions. It would basically be three groups. And so we get the three best Herons, three best Zergs, three best Protosses, and we put one of each in each group. And then the winner of each group goes to a final group. And that would be another one. So that's how the Ascension stuff usually works. And then I guess like each win would be in the final group would be worth a certain amount of money. And maybe like if you make it out in first place of the entry group, the qualifier group, that would basically be like worth a certain amount of money too. I don't know, it's stuff like that, right? I feel like that's pretty cool. And then we can see what people have to say. I did think back in the day that maybe we would host like an actual like a prize money one that doesn't take forever to get paid out, because like obviously we're going to pay it out before Christmas probably, so people can actually use it for holiday money if they want to, depending on how much they got. And most people it's not going to be that much, but you know, Mystery Meat, for example, will have a nice chunk of change, I think. Anyway, having all of that said, like I was thinking maybe we would actually have, say, like something simple like $100, which is still a healthy amount of money for like, you know, I can spend it, but it's I don't not notice it gone from my account. I'll put it to you that way right now, as far as my personal financial state. So, you know, I don't got it like that I can do that every month or every week, especially, but maybe every month I could, but every week probably not. So it's like, okay, if I'm going to do something like that, that could be pretty cool. And I thought to myself, maybe we just invite like top tier players and say like, listen, you can get the lion's share of $100 if you win all these matches in this like Ascension style group, King of the Hill style group. and see what they say. But I'm kind of like red pilled on that now because we've had people like Hubsaya, the StarCraft 2 Grandmaster. We've had people like Keen, who's like an A rank Zerg, and they need to actually play and practice and figure it out. Like their first time, they just get run over by people who are way worse than them in an RTS sense, right? And so I don't really think it's that useful in actuality for like project discovery because they're not going to experience the best that the project has to offer without actually giving it a shot and practicing up for it. So if we invited like a bunch of pros, for example, like if I invited, say, Terror for the Terran player, and then DeWalt for the Protoss player, and then or DeWalt or Boneth or somebody like that for Protoss, and then I don't even know who would be Zerg, maybe Hawk or yeah, I guess it would probably be Hawk probably. If I invite these guys, right, like I don't think they're going to be able to play. Any one of them is going to be able to play super well. They would need to verse themselves with the project. They need to figure out what's going on in there, and so I don't know if we can actually get those kinds of things done, right? I think they need to sort of show, organic interest in the project, and then we can do it. However, if we end up getting like a big donation sometime or like some kind of wild sponsorship or whatever, and they throw us, say, like $1,000, and that's like a big amount of money, and that's supposed to be the prize pool, or like, I don't know, half of that's prize pool, and then half of that is like other expenses, or, I don't even know what else you would do for expenses, to be honest, but say however much money, like $500, $1,000, like, if that's the prize and it's just for one tournament, because we go down to a frequency of, say, one every other month, which is going to allow us to do other things, instead of just always working on the tournament stuff, we can work on tech, we can fix bugs, we can improve audio visuals a lot better, and so on and so forth, and make content and all this other stuff. It's like, okay, if that's going to be the flow, and I think that is going to be the flow in the future, so we'll have like 6 total premier tournaments for 2024, and then, we'll have a bunch of like smaller things here and there, then suddenly like maybe that in of itself is going to be able to draw interest. So I'm not ruling it out that like pros from Brood War, like amateur, semi-pros, etc., would be interested in checking it out and seeing what's going on. But I feel like you can't just like for one, we've actually attained a high enough level of general competition that like people who have qualified to this tournament can probably beat pros when they first start playing. So it's no longer like what happened with Keen, where he just ends up defeating, say, like I guess a depleted Darkened Fantasies and a cheesy Nozlix, and it's like, okay, he ends up exiting his group. Or whatever. It's like, no, I don't think that's going to happen anymore. Like, I think the players that we have in these group stages would dumpster like people like DeWalt, Gypsy, Terror, Boneth. Like, these are legendary names in the foreign Brood War scene, and you would not I would just take anybody in groups basically over these people. I think they would absolutely get destroyed. And I don't even think it would be related to cheese. It would just be knowledge check. It would just be like, you tried to do like a low worker thing like Keen did, and you build like 20 workers in the early game. I was like, no, bro, there's no supply here. You have you don't get punished for building workers in the same way. It's not the same kind of game. It's very different. So I think that alone is going to be a huge surprise for a lot of people. And yeah, as a result, I think they would need to show organic appreciation or interest of the project or in the project. And that would have to be the primary thing, I think. So yeah, that's the metric. That's the method of how we get more eyes on the project as far as like experienced Protoss players or Zerg players or Terran players from StarCraft 1. And it's kind of funny that StarCraft 2 ended up having some people in it that wanted to try it out. Like Benza's apparently a Masters player in StarCraft 2. Obviously Hubsaya, Grandmasters player, StarCraft 2 active, like grinder in that sense, with professional, what would you say? Aspirations or whatever. Like he has competed before and all that stuff. So I feel like all that stuff is really cool. And to me, it just makes sense to try it. So at some point we will do that. Like we'll extend the invitation out there. But I think it would be better if like news just keeps boiling. And then like after so many times of being exposed to it, these people are like, well, fuck it. I might as well give it a shot and see what's going on. Like, if Hawk or somebody like tries to pop in and see what's up. We get rated on Twitch every now and then by people. Like there's more people discovering us all the time. So I think it's a no-brainer. Obviously, we're going to have some matches. We're going to have some games that end up getting picked up by like the broader audience or whatever. And they're like, holy shit, like XYZ thing is true or epic. And yeah. So with that in mind, with that being said, I hope you guys are excited as excited as I am for the future of CMBW. I think it's going to be great. I think the break is going to be not just deserved, but also like useful. And it's not like a break from doing work. It's a break from specifically focusing super heavily on 1v1s and such. So there you go. That is the lowdown. And now it's time for them coffee questions. I am a fan of coffee, and I am a fan of ko-fi.com/Pronogo in week 7. A link you can find in the description if you want to send us money and fund further project development. And without further ado, let's get into week 7's question. Oh my god, dude, he takes the money and he asks the question. It's like the opposite of what everybody else does, but he's a homie, so you know how it goes. If you had to reimagine Cosmonarchy Brood War to have a high number of tiers with the same amount of units, how would you do it? So this came at a time, because obviously this episode is a little overdue, when we basically had the idea, like we were having a back and forth about like whether or not there would be any changes to the tech pacing or whatever. And I think like right now the tech pacing is obviously very slow in Cosmonarchy Brood War, insofar as like to get to the next tier you have to have a pretty high investment. That is kind of not true for Protoss, but it's more true than you would think for Protoss because, well, you're not going to be able to build like a very large army off of just one production structure, obviously. But Protoss have this whole shtick of like having very powerful fonts, you know, within their group, right? They have like the one focal point unit that can turn a tide. That's mostly true. Like the race that is most true for, or most often true for, is absolutely going to be Protoss. So when we consider it from that perspective, I think it makes a lot of sense that they kind of act as a weird, wonky way of like, they exist outside of the remits of this question, where, I mean, you would just add like, so the main thing here is that like, if it's the same amount of units in the tech tree, then how would you do the tech tier changes? I don't think Protoss would even have to change. I think, you know, I guess maybe they would have less structures per tier because I have to keep the number of units the same, but you, like the gateway and the grand library might be the only, it might be like gateway tier 1, grand library tier 3, and ancestral archives tier 7 or something, right? And then like prostration stage would be 5. Then we would probably have some new thing for tier 9, or I don't know. Like I'm not exactly sure how it would go because it's a little wonky for Protoss, right? If I'm not allowed to increase the number of units, then like suddenly we're back to a point where each production structure has to unlock only like 3 units. And that's a little bit awkward. Or each production structure has to sort of like skip tiers, right? Which is sort of what I was thinking of there, is that like the current gateway in its form would exist, and then we would have like the rogue gallery as tier 2 only, and then grand library would be tier 3, and then, you know, prostration stage is 4, and ancestral archives is 5, and then I guess that would probably be it. Maybe we could add a 6th one and then like shuffle some units around, but that would probably be it. So it'd just be 5. His original question, I think he said like 7 to 8 or something. But I can't really see a way that you would not. I think you would have to raise the unit count if you wanted Protoss to have the same tiers. The only other way I can think of doing it would be like probably with a tiered pylon system or whatever, where the gateway and the lattice would be like the only structures you build in the early stages of the game, and you upgrade the auras or whatever with pylons, like tier 2 pylons, and then that powers up the other stuff. But we can't do that in Brood War anyway because of the AI issues, like the limitations with the AI system and the requirement systems. So that's kind of like a, if I could, in a perfect world where we had source access or whatever, or a working Antikythera engine, then maybe that would be something that you could think about. But yeah, so Protoss are definitely like the weirdest one to do. But for Terrans, it's kind of simple, right? It's just like you've got this, the add-ons would basically be the tier 2, so they would be a bit pricier, but the units that they would unlock would be a little bit more potent. And I guess like the star pad would probably be priced as a tier 1.5 or tier 2 structure or something, but still available at tier 1. And then, well, I guess no, because we're thinking about expanding the tiers. So the like, basically each one of the tiers as they currently are, so tier 2 would become like tier 3, and the current tier 3 would become like tier 5, and then we would have like 0.5s in between, sort of like how we used to, but that would be what used to be like tier 1.5 where I guess there was never a 1.5, but like we would carve out like a 1.5 that would basically be the new tier 2, and that would be where you have like scrapyard requiring some kind, scrapyard and vestry requiring something a little bit more elevated. Instead of you having access to them in the early game. I think that would probably be kind of inferior. So I would probably be shuffling some of the units around. Like maybe the Cyclops becomes more powerful, but requires the tier 1.5 add-on, the tier 2 add-on really. And so it requires an attached scrapyard, and the scrapyard would be renamed. And then you'd have like Cyclops Matador at tier 2 from the Fulcrum. And Blackjack would replace the Cyclops and the in the early stages, right? Just from the Fulcrum. And that would be like one option, right? I guess maybe the Blackjack could replace the Goliath, and the Goliath could require the add-on, and the Scrapyard would obviously be retitled, so it wouldn't be about scrap. That might make the most sense, because then the fact is you still have some kind of splash from Fulcrum at tier 1, which I think would be important. So that could be one option. I think like tier 2 would be the benchmark where you get Star Pad, so you wouldn't have air for Terran until then. That obviously hurts their drop options, but like tier 2 would be cheaper, right, than it currently is. And tier 3 would probably be like the current cost of tier 2, and so on and so forth. So I don't think that would be the return of tech add-ons, though. I think I would just add like new units there. I mean, I assume I can technically add like a couple of new things here and there where it makes sense. So for the purposes of the question, I'll assume that. So hopefully that makes some sense as like the general direction I would go. And then I guess for Zerg, we would just have like the initial mutations, like the Calcure Pond. So Ben's actually came up with this idea that like maybe you just have like the one structure for each thing and it's just linear. So it's like you build the Quazeth pool and then you mutate that into the Calcure Pond as it is. And then you also mutate that into like the tier 3, the Axtoth Axis or whatever. Or maybe you mutate the Calcure Pond into the Mutat Spire, and the Mutat Spire mutates into the Tozrel Haunt, and the Tozrel Haunt mutates into the Axtoth Axis. So that could be like one way you could do it. So that would be like basically tiers 1 through 5 right there. Another thing you could do is branching paths. But I think I'd probably do the previous one. I think maybe Benzo was even saying that you could do branching paths or whatever. But I would probably just say like, yeah, okay, we're going to do like the nested stuff or whatever. So you would at least have like an additional mutation for each current structure that exists. So like that would basically be, there would at least be like a tier 3 version of the Quazeth pool, because tier 2 of being Calcure Pond would be like, that would unlock the Calcalisk, but not the Lyralisk. Maybe the Lyralisk requires the tier 3 thing, and the Lyralisk is actually like a more powerful unit as a result, just as like one example. Or maybe it would be like Quazeth pool gives you the, I don't know exactly how I would do that. That's probably what I would do, though. I'd probably do something like that, where like each individual tech node evolves one extra time. And then like maybe the point at which you access them is also different, similar to tier 2 for Terran becoming tier 3. Like the current tier 2 would become tier 3. And then like the current tier 2 for Zerg would also become tier 3 in that sense. So we would be shuffling some stuff around, but hopefully that makes sense as to how I would go about it. And I don't know. I don't think it would be good for CMBW. I think this thought exercise, I've done it a number of times anyway, but the thing that I keep coming back to as a thought is this would be much better for like its own game, or like from a ground up sort of first principles design, instead of trying to make it work in this context. But we'll see how it goes. Thanks for your question, dude. Hope you're doing well. Looking forward to seeing you in group stage. The Shambler asks, what would be your original take on the vampire archetype? I haven't really put much thought into vampires. Like I've seen some movies featuring them. One of my exes was super big into vampires, like just always had been from a wee lass. So I got my fair share of lore and like information on them and stuff from that interaction, from that relationship. So I kind of know, like I know a thing or two about them. Obviously it's not just like purely what's in pop culture. Like I've seen some of the more obscure vampire movies, some of them, not all of them, but I've seen enough to know that there's like a bunch of different ways that they've been presented. Sometimes it's glitz and glamour. Sometimes it's like more horrific and, terrifying. And sometimes it is maybe subversive or whatever. So what would be my original take on the vampire archetype? I mean, I probably wouldn't need to worry too much about like the nuts and bolts, like, oh, they bite and that's how they either turn, sire or something, or they become, what would you say? Like that's how they feast. I think, funnily enough, the Alex Jones comment about interdimensional vampire pedophiles or whatever, like minus the pedophile thing, I think you could probably think about it that way. It's like, it doesn't have to be that they expressly feed in a physical sense. It's like what you think about a vampire, you think about something that drains your energy. That's what I think. Like a psychic vampire would be more interesting to me than like a literal I bite you or feed on you and drain your blood. Something that drains you of your life force like blood is like a stand-in from that, from a metaphorical standpoint, right? But I don't think we would need the blood part. I think we could probably just have it so that your soul itself is sapped in some way by whatever this entity is. And, considering vampires a parasite, that's like another trope within the archetypes or within certain things. I think that would be probably fine in this context as well. It's like they're a soul parasite as opposed to a, blood-sucking one. So what would I do with that idea as like a psychic vampire? It's like, for those who don't know, in the context of like sports and competition, it's actually been used before to refer to something as a psychic vampire or whatever, is like for whatever reason, this player plays really well domestically, and then they go abroad to compete in some international competition, and then they like shit the bed and totally fall apart. Or I don't know, he moved to this new team, and for some reason at this new team, he just performed way worse than he did in his old team. And it's like inexplicable. It seems like he's being set up the same way, used a similar way, but he just doesn't perform as well. What's going on? Is it the psychic vampires again? So I've heard that before under that circumstance. And that's funnily enough what I think about. But yeah, I mean, I think I would probably go for something like that just simply puts their prey in a state of mind, or their hosts, if we're going to consider them a parasite, in a state of mind such that they are more and more amenable to their life force. They expose more and more of themselves, I guess, to be more vulnerable. And the more vulnerable they are, the more their life force is drained, and until they are left a husk, or super just distraught and barren, run roughshod over. But that's kind of vague. Like, I feel like I'm not really answering the question super well. I'm trying to think about like how else I could put that to words, but yeah, I don't know. Sometimes you're just out of shit, or you don't immediately think of anything. But I guess like if I think a little bit, that's kind of not a million miles away from what Kalapoazos is, insofar as they seem to be like harvesting terror. And is it just their own amusement? Is there some sort of deeper reason they're doing it? Is it like a biological imperative? So like I could at least draw a connection there. Maybe that can kind of clue Shambler into my thinking or something. So hopefully that was a question or an answer that you felt justified the question. And thanks again for hanging out, dude. Myrian asks, if you felt a desire to expand xibalba after all the regencies are completed, what gameplay and concepts would you explore? And this is actually related to another question that Pr0totype asks about the regencies. And so normally I wouldn't do this, but I'm actually going to combine their questions. So Pr0totype says, what were the reject concepts when you were designing your first 20 regencies for xibalba? Are there any concepts you didn't use that may come into the game as upstarts or expansion regencies? It's funny that they both asked, like, these are distinct questions, but they are so closely related that I think it's worth pointing out. There actually weren't any reject concepts, because even the ones that I thought of that would like maybe be too one note are things that were integrated into, say, the Ember Seat, or like the universe's history as something that, like the engineers that made the Rosellium, for example. I didn't start with the Rosellium. I started with their engineers. And then I thought, well, what if I think about like take their engineering to the logical conclusion of what they might do, or like one extreme potential situation. And so they're incorporated into the history in some way, shape, or form. But in a way, like the Avot and the Thruk and etc. could actually end up becoming like, in further development, I might decide actually they're a little bit too one note, and I might not be able to make a regency out of them, and so therefore they would become upstarts or expansion, some sort of thing to answer like Pr0totype's part of the question. And then for Myrian, asking about the, what kind of gameplay and concepts would I explore after all their regencies are completed? I actually don't know that there would be that much room left. I know that probably sounds naive, and if I listen back to this in like 5 years or whatever, I might think that that's really funny to say. But like there is a maximum amount of scale you can achieve and reasonably expect humans to comprehend, at least right now. That's my feeling on it. And so I actually don't even know, for example, if like 10 tiers of tech is plausible if the tiers are going to be anywhere near the level of depth that you see out of, say, CMBW stuff. People already get overwhelmed as it is. Obviously, part of that is, I guess, egged on by the fact that we don't have a great amount of tutorial content or onboarding. So you could say that it's exacerbated by a lack of learning material. But I kind of feel like there's like an upper limit to how much could be done. And if you have 20 races, or regencies in this case, maybe they can't all go up to 10 tiers. Maybe they have to cap at 5 or even 3. Like, I'm not saying that's my current plan for xibalba, obviously. But I am saying that there's like an upper limit. And maybe we're actually closer to it than we think. And I'm still going to aim big. But obviously through development, a lot will be revealed. And CMBW is revealing a lot already, and I'm grateful for that as an opportunity to learn what might be the limitations of the designs. So we'll have to see about that. But yeah, I guess to more concretely discuss what Myrian was talking about, if I felt a desire to expand xibalba, I would need to see, in order to answer this question properly, I basically need to have released the xibalba regencies. All 20 of them that we currently have, or like whatever the final 20 might be, or, you know, as long as it's divisible by 2, it's fine. Like if we only get to 15, or 16 rather, or 18 or something, I don't think that would be a failure. It's just like I have all of these ideas and I think it would be fine to try them. But I would look for basically the same thing that I think about. I can explain my thought process behind like the Askosi edition, for example. It's like, I feel like there is a room for a race of like, you can kind of divvy up Protoss, Zerg, Terran by scale. The same way that I talked about earlier, it's like when I was talking about that game mode that Biddy B did a bounty for. The idea that I had was, here's a case where your game mode stuff like favors one race or could favor one race. And it's like Protoss make less units, but individually they matter more. Zerg make more units and individually they matter less. And then Terran are somewhere in the middle. And of course, it like varies depending on which branch you go. Actually, for all of those cases, but especially for Terran, it's like sometimes they can be more on the Protoss side with mech and more on the Zerg side with bio. And air can kind of be one or the other. So I think in that sense, I was thinking like, okay, well, if we have a 4th race, then where would it fall in that particular example? And I was thinking, well, what are we missing right now? And I think we're missing something that has in between the scale of Terran and Protoss, so not as swarmy as Zerg, like not like closer to Terran or Protoss, like in between them as far as the level of scale goes, but still requiring a lot of micro to get to be like cost efficient, or like super like cost, like they have this upper apex of like what you can do with them, while still being approachable in some way by their opponents, right? Like again, don't want them to be OP as fuck. And I think considering that, using that as like a yardstick or one kind of metric to compare it to is like, yeah, do we have something that like is missing, or like if I was going to add something, where would I add it? And that goes down to if you go to the xibalba Regency page, there are these like defining traits. And one of them is like the amount of units you can expect in terms of the numbers. Are they fast by nature, or are they like generally fast? Overall as a species, like Zerg would obviously be faster by and large than the other races in terms of movement speed and stuff like that, right? So it's like, you know, where do we get from there? What about their weapon ranges? What about their, their general characterization and their general look? Like, how do they like to take fights, particularly in the early stages of the game, before they start to specialize a bit more into, like, say, artillery or base breakers or whatever? And what are we missing in that respect? So I always look for stuff like that. It's like, where is there like a gap in the current roster? And this is how I think about adding a unit as well. It's like, where's there a gap that if I filled it would increase the strategic depth of the game, and provide a tool for players who currently don't have as much, like they don't have that many good options to provide for that. So like maybe there's going to be people out there who play Askosi and feel like, oh my God, this fits my playstyle better than any of the default races do in CMBW. And that would be the case where, like, without the Askosi, maybe they like Terran with drops, or maybe they like Protoss with certain unit compositions that are a lot of micro, or maybe they like Zerg, but only under the certain, like if they go to a certain branch or whatever. And that would be like a kind of thing that's like, okay, well, if we have players that are fitting that bill, they are missing. There's a gap in the game for those kinds of players that they don't even know exists yet. And when they play the Askosi, it might slot right in for them. And without actually having the game in front of me, I can't really tell you, right? So, but that's sort of the heuristic I would use, or the thought process I would use to discuss what might be an addition, what might be a good way to add it. So similar to Shambler's question, actually, for Myrian's question in particular, I have to kind of say, hopefully the answer was enlightening and at least give you like an idea into my thought process. But I can't actually answer the question super well because I don't really know what concepts I would explore. Like, by the point where we have all 20 regencies, we would definitely have nailed down what are consistent mechanics, like what are mechanics that I just can't go into, and what are mechanics that each regency has to be able to interact with. And the can't go into part is like, if any race has this, then they all need to. So I really need to be careful about adding this, and like, because then I would have to retroactively apply it to everything else somehow. And that's not going to be positive. That's more prohibitive the more races you have, right? And then for the context of like everybody needs to be able to do X, Y, Z thing. It's like, yeah, well, every race probably needs to be able to heal or otherwise replenish. Every race probably needs to be able to like destroy terrain in xibalba or in Cosmonarchy Retail, whatever it turns out to be called, because it's like, oh yeah, well, that's just like a mechanic in the game. So like obviously every race needs to be able to harvest resources. It's like on that level basically, but like scaled up to what makes players able to compete with each other, regardless of what regency they pick. So these are kinds of questions that I end up asking myself. And it's like, okay, can I observe any gaps? Can I come up with any ideas that wouldn't be basically like overlapping too heavily with another regency or race or whatever? So as to, or in the case of like adding a new unit, can I come up with a case that's not total overlap? And so, if that's the case, then I can start riffing and I can start coming up with stuff. So I hope that has answered all of your questions, and that will close us out. The show outro is just me talking about how I appreciate you guys waiting and being patient for this episode of Prototype. I plan to put up the next thread very soon, and so you can ask your questions there. And also, I will, of course, be continuing to record episodes and continuing to smash out the tournament stuff for Ascension number 7. And I look forward to whatever our 8th tournament is called, and whatever happens in between now and then. GG's, and I'll see you guys soon.